You're looking at a live view of the Falcon 9 rocket on the SpaceX launch pad, preparing for liftoff in just about 10 minutes from now at 7:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Good morning and welcome to the live webcast of the NROL-76 mission. I'm John Fettersfield, a lead mechanical design engineer here at SpaceX, and today we are launching a classified payload for the National Reconnaissance Office from historic launch pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Now, today's mission and final orbit are classified, and as such, we will conclude coverage of the primary mission following separation of the fairing. However, as we will attempt to land and recover the first stage, we'll continue to cover this secondary objective once the primary mission coverage has concluded. Now, for today's mission, we'll be attempting another landing of that first stage back at Landing Zone 1, or LZ1 as we colloquially call it. And today's attempt will be in daylight, so we should have some incredible footage to share.
T-minus 10 minutes.
You're looking at the SpaceX rocket on Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. Now, this is the same launch pad that launched the Saturn V, as well as numerous space shuttle launches. And SpaceX first leased this pad a few years ago, and we started launching from this very pad at the beginning of the year. Now, some interesting things to see as you look at there. Obviously, the Falcon 9 itself is in the center of the image there, and it is being supported by the transport erector. You can see at the forward end of the rocket, just below the fairing being the very tip of the rocket. The forward end of the transport erector is supporting the rocket. At about the T-minus 4-minute mark, you're going to see the forward arms of the transport erector open up, and the transport erector will recline back about 1.5 degrees. At liftoff, when the 9 Merlin engines fully ignite, that transport erector will fall away, and the rocket will be released to deliver its payload to orbit. There are still some heritage structures around there as we continue to upgrade this pad for future launches. You can see some structures behind it that were there from the space shuttle era. And SpaceX continues to make modifications to this pad as we continue to look forward for Falcon Heavy launches as well as crew from this very pad. Now, that Falcon 9 launch vehicle does stand over 200 feet tall. It's about 12 meters in diameter, about 36 feet. And at liftoff, the thrust of that vehicle is equivalent to greater than 5 747s taking off at the same time. As we mentioned previously, we will be covering the landing at Landing Zone 1 for the first stage. And you'll see that pad on your screen. That is where we're going to be bringing back the first stage at Cape Canaveral. And while that pad may look small or a little bit deceptive, that is nearly 300 feet in diameter. We did first successfully land at that pad about 16 months ago when we delivered 11 Orbcomm satellites to low Earth orbit. And since that mission, we've had 2 other successful landings, with the most recent occurring on February 19th of this year. And as I mentioned previously, today's mission is classified, and we will conclude coverage of the primary mission following separation of the fairing. But we are going to continue to cover that landing attempt after separation of the first stage from the second stage.
Stage 1 fuel load closed out.
We're just inside the 6-minute mark, and all systems are go right now from Kennedy Space Center, pad 39A. Now, if you tuned in yesterday, you noticed that at about 52 seconds before liftoff, our launch director called a hold over the countdown net due to an out-of-family reading on a first stage sensor. Now, we have hundreds of sensors positioned throughout the vehicle on the first stage, second stage, as well as our fairing that help us monitor all kinds of variables from acceleration, pressure, temperature, and numerous other parameters. And while this particular sensor did have a redundancy, the readings it was providing for us were out of tolerance, and so out of an abundance of caution, we opted to hold launch and replace that sensor in question. That replacement has been made, and we are currently go for today's launch. Right now, just coming up on the 5-minute mark here, we are concluding loading on the RP1 onto our first stage. That is, RP1 is refined kerosene. That is one of our propellants for the mission. And we are topping off liquid oxygen as well on that first stage. And we're going to keep topping that off for about 2 more minutes. We're loading over 1.1 million pounds of propellant on the first and second stage combined. Are loaded at this point in the count.